Welcome to the Bicurian podcast, where we explore and embrace the seeming contradictions of life. What actually is Bicurian, you ask?
Well, you may not necessarily have a mental concept of Bicurian, partially maybe because it's a made-up word. You embody it. What's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that which is different.
And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
And it is in the differences we carry in ourselves that we find the Bicurian moment.
When you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it. It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing.
It's letting go of the or to make room for the and. We embrace all of you. Welcome to the Bicurian.
Hello there. Do you like movies but feel overwhelmed by the avalanche of titles available every week in the theaters and on streaming services? Do you struggle with justifying the increasing cost of movies at the theater or whether to pick up another streaming service? Well, I have a resource for you. One Movie Punch. Your movie review podcast for currently playing, newly streaming classic and cult movies. One movie per day, every day. We track the theaters, streaming services, and the occasional physical release to find the best movies currently available. We watch every film, then distill it into a short 3 to 5 minute review and publish a daily podcast. And now with year 2, we've gone spoiler-free for all movies within the last 3 years and bringing on a team of reviewers with brand new perspectives and selections. Want more information? Head over to www.onemoviepunch.com to subscribe to the daily podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at OneMoviePunch and Facebook at www.facebook.com/OneMoviePunch. We'll see you there.
Welcome to the show this week. I'm Eric.
And I am Aisla.
And we had kind of a fun idea because a very good friend of mine for many years has been my go-to for so many entertainment-related things, and we decided to have him on the show. And so this one's going to be a little more of a fun one, talking about essentially what's going on in the world of entertainment and pop culture and that sort of thing. So, Matt, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Matt the Pharaoh Wizard, as I go by on the YouTubes. And, yeah.
So what do you do on your YouTube channel so people know? And, of course, we'll link to it.
Yeah, I do movie reviews, horror movie reviews, comic stuff, drunk unboxings, but big on comic book stuff. That's been my bread and butter.
And like one of the things you loved about Glass was the amount of comic book references in that movie, right?
Yeah, especially because they're super accurate on how comics work and what.
So for people listening that have no idea what this is in reference to,
The movie
I personally,
Glass.
I was really excited that Glass was coming out. I remembered really liking Unbreakable, and I totally fell for it, and somehow it didn't get spoiled by the time I watched it. But watching Split and realizing, oh my God, this is in the same universe as Unbreakable, and setting up that third movie, which it felt like they must have started shooting almost immediately after the release of Split. And I was really looking forward to it, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed their take on it. I like comic book movies and that sort of thing. And Matt, on the other hand, was a little less impressed.
It's a comic book movie written by a guy who either has never read a comic book or has no idea how to vocalize what he's read.
That's fair.
And I think to be honest, that's kind of what made me excited about it, was that it was a take on the idea of superheroes, but like in a more real way, right? Like, I mean, Marvel kind of started there with Iron Man because dude could build a suit.
Yeah.
He was just a regular guy.
Yeah.
And then eventually we got gods like Thor and all of that coming in. But realistically, I think that's what I just enjoyed about the Unbreakable series, was that it felt more like if there was going to be a real life scenario of superheroes running around, this might be more what it looks like. Glass was good. As you like to say, Matt, it was just fine.
It's just fine.
Yeah, just fine. James McAvoy is a delight. I'll just
Oh,
say that.
he is. Everything he did was beautiful. Like, so we're gonna say, at the very least, we recommend McAvoy. We don't have a consensus on any other aspect of what's going on here, but McAvoy for sure, consensus.
Yeah.
So that actually, I have a question for you. In that, like, I'm a huge comic book fan, but thank you for fixing my microphone. I'm a huge comic book fan. However, I've mostly read like a lot of indie comics.
Sure.
So I don't have as much. I dove into some of the more, I'm not going to say mainstream comics, but the not indie comics.
Right.
For a period of time. Do you have like a preference in terms of like world building and storytelling? Do you do mostly like the big ones, DC, Marvel kind of stuff, or do you also dive into some of those indie?
I do. It's mostly Marvel and DC, but yeah, there's a couple indie studios I really like. Valiant Comics is really good. Boom's doing some really cool stuff. Who else? There's a couple others, but yeah, it's mostly the big ones. Mostly because they have such the backstory and everything. Where if I'm jumping brand new into a universe, it's hard to get on that train right away.
Yeah, it can be.
I think that's one of the intimidating things for a lot of people is that, I mean, if you really want to dive into Marvel or DC, start back in the 60s and go. And yeah, I mean, I admit for that reason, like, I know the things that I know and I have learned what I don't know. And then that's why it's great to have Matt as my phone a friend for who is this character they just introduced in this random Marvel show or movie or whatever.
It's important to have that friend.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Well, and realistically, I mean, I could start the legacy reading, but it's intimidating. There's a lot.
There's a lot.
I mean, it's a lot. Nowadays it's a lot easier because you got Wikipedia. You got different fan sites. Basically, the internet's simplified the whole thing. I couldn't even imagine getting into comics in like the 80s where it's just like, well, now you have to hunt down, Spider-Man number 427 to understand what's happening in this Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And you don't know where to find it because your only source is other comic shops.
Right.
Well, and that's where I think MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, has done such a good job because they have done the world building. Mm-hmm. They give you the backstory on things. They've changed a few things from how it might have been in the comic, but they have tied it together. Something very simple that I appreciate is getting the same actors to play the same roles. Yeah. Aside from the beginning with the Hulk, switching it up a little bit.
And Rhodey.
Oh, yeah, that's right. But, in general, like, it's funny because I kind of have this lottery bingo thing I do. Like, you see these big name actors and then suddenly they're in an MCU movie and, like, that's who they are now.
Yeah.
If that character's going to come back, it's going to be that actor.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, in my review of Glass, I related the doctor. I can't think of the actress's name, but I was like, but since I have to relate everyone to a comic book character, she was the nurse in The Spirit. For all 7 people that watched The Spirit.
Oh, man. I got so many warnings about that I decided not to do that to myself.
It's a good idea.
So I know that, so by Kyrian, we talk about contradictions. Sure. And what's your stance on DC versus Marvel and the ways in which that can be opposing camps versus friendly comic book rivals?
Well, that is a constant, like, which do you prefer, Marvel or DC? Like, you have to pick a side, but, you don't have to. You can like both. If you look at my database of comics that I have, I strongly prefer Marvel, but there's a lot of DC characters I really enjoy getting into.
Is it a storytelling aspect or is it just simply they write on themes that you prefer? I mean, why do people feel this? Is it sort of that's that dumb like Star Wars, Star Trek thing? Like people somehow decide that one is better for arbitrary reasons, or is there some aspect of it that like actually is different?
There is definite differences. One quote I really liked is that Marvel is regular people trying to be gods, where DC are gods trying to be regular people, where they have the stronger powered people that are working to be like regular people, where everyone in Marvel is trying to, better, be stronger and build themselves up, kind of thing.
That's interesting. I've never heard that quote before, but it does make sense. I mean,
Yeah.
I admit that one of the things that I've always had a problem with in DC is Superman. I mean, indestructible, can fly, can pretty much do anything. Like, it's a comic that's run forever.
Yeah.
But the clever ways that you have to come up with things, to throw at somebody who's a living god.
Yeah.
Like, it's so bonkers most of the time that,
Yeah, Gail Simone said that anyone that finds Superman boring to write isn't very clever, because he can't just because he is so powerful, you have to be, more interesting with how you create problems for him to deal with.
Well, and with Captain Marvel, that's what, a lot of the people running the MCU movies were saying, was adding that character in. She's essentially a female Superman from the Marvel universe. And so, having an excuse why she wasn't on Earth for the last 10 years worth of movies, was kind of a key ingredient that they were writing around. This is an article that I read not too long ago. They were just talking about how she's the hardest one to write for because you have to throw such crazy things at her.
Yeah, and she doesn't have the worst aspect of Superman, in my opinion, is kryptonite.
Right.
Because as soon as you have that, then he's completely useless. So he's either the most powerful person ever or completely useless.
Right.
Where she doesn't have that at all that I'm aware of. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that.
Well, yeah, from what I've heard, the cat alien steals that show.
Yeah, Goose.
Yeah. So,
Well, and I'm actually just really excited to have a female superhero, heroine, I guess, that is, frankly, and I loved Wonder Woman as a child. However, I was not impressed with the movie. I felt like she was really flat, and anyhow, so so I'm interested to see if maybe Captain Marvel will be a little bit more dynamic and maybe a little more representative of a human experience rather than so boring.
Yeah, no, I think they're going to do some good stuff. Brie Larson's a great actress, and Marvel finally getting their first female-led superhero movie. Only 10 years in, but it can be interesting what they're going to be able to do with her.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm surprised they haven't jumped on that bandwagon way earlier. They could have beat Wonder Woman to the punch.
well, I mean, yeah, I would have definitely been into a Black Widow movie.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
that's happening. So that is
Now.
yeah.
Finally.
Well, there is a story behind that I can't think of his name, but there is the old head of Marvel, who was a head of the studio, head of the comics, head of everything, said Black Widow movie would never work. So he was always the one stomping it down. Then when Disney bought Marvel, and there was like that weird split where they're like, now Marvel Studios is their own thing, and everyone's like, well, weren't they always? The main point of that was to push that guy to only being head of comics and TV, where now Kevin Feige is the head all, be all, everything of the movies, and Kevin Feige's wanted a Black Widow movie, so he's finally gotten the pull to do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing how much business politics there is
Yeah.
in all of this. And yet, as I mentioned, one of the things I love about the MCU is the consistency, the tie-in,
Oh, yeah.
how things, come together and all of that. And I mean, he's done a great job of creating a universe that, like I remember maybe it was Avengers 2, where, no more origin stories,
Yeah.
no more setup. Like they approached it, they just dove right in and they approached it like, look, if you haven't watched the other 10 movies before now,
Yeah.
then We don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, no, I got a friend at work that watched Infinity War and has really only seen a couple other ones in passing. And she's like, I don't know who any of these people are. I hate this movie. And I was like, well, you're basically watching season 2, episode 5 of Game of Thrones and complaining you don't know who any of these people are. Actually, probably even later down there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and again, it's such a pop culture phenomenon right now that they've managed to do this. And, for me, the whole DC Marvel thing has been that in general, the DC movies, like they tried to force things.
Yeah.
There was bad writing. They've turned the term reshoot into a swear word for me because that never seems to work out.
Well, movies actually have always had reshoots, but it's only now because we know so much about the process and actors are on Twitter saying I got to go in for reshoots and
have my mustache digitally removed.
Yeah. But yeah, now they're doing they're trying to save movies with reshoots rather than just well, we didn't
Fix
quite
the
get
little
this
things.
shot. Yeah.
So I was watching Bill Maher a couple weeks ago, and he did a thing on the death of Stan Lee.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of people thought he was saying Stanley was bad or whatever. And actually what he was saying was that all of us people who like comic books are, childish and, and not, evolved or whatever. And he even quoted the Bible, which I find, Bill Maher quoting the Bible.
Yeah.
But I just we're having this conversation around these movies that, we have been impacted by emotionally, right? I personally, as a student of literature, really see a lot of archetypes in them. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective on that, because he's not alone. There's a lot of folks who are like, you guys who love comics are just pathetic and aren't grown up and blah, blah.
I heard that in the 90s from kids in high school that thought I was a nerd and a geek. And then guess what? They needed their iPhone set up. Suddenly the nerds and the geeks were out and we're allowed to be around. It's actually, that to me has been a major revolution because nerd or geek no longer have a fundamentally negative connotation. And I find it kind of funny because it feels that's the exact same kind of thing that the bullies used to say. It makes me think of Bill Maher as a bully.
Yeah. And that whole thing, and I've heard it a lot still, and I've heard Bill Maher thing, and basically it's people that are only looking at the surface. They're just going, oh, it's superhero movies. But superhero movies are far beyond being just superhero movies anymore. There's themes of all sorts of different things: family dynamic, acceptance. I mean, it really depends on the movie you're seeing because they're all so different and so interesting. Even Batman v Superman, which is a terrible movie, had interesting themes that aren't usually explored in movies. And so I think there's a step towards that they're not just, comic book movies. And really, Black Panther being nominated for Best Picture is, I think, a good sign of that, is that we're past just
They're
it's
getting
a stupid
taken.
comic
Yeah,
book.
they're getting taken seriously.
Exactly. And they're pulling in the best actors to be in these. It's not just, this guy's buff, throw him in a suit and we'll make a movie. And it's people that have grown up with comics and knowing the characters that want to make a good movie and not just a cash in. They actually want to put the effort and they want to explore the character. And there are actual people that have read the comics and know comics aren't just like stupid kid things. They have deep meaning and, long running stories and things of that nature.
I find most people don't realize the depth of character development and storytelling that has been in those comics. I mean, realistically, when you're talking about, Stan Lee's contributions and stuff, so he wrote compelling characters and was able to explore some really kind of interesting and deep, themes, and people blow them off because they're colorful or black and white panel drawings. Some bad.
Yeah, and then in the pop culture arena where more people pay attention, as like TV shows and movies, they weren't always given the best treatment. We can say like the old Super Friends cartoon will always haunt Aquaman for as long as anyone knows Aquaman. All you're going to think is the Super Friends Aquaman.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And so that's what a lot of people's experience was a show in the 70s, 80s, even the 90s.
Yeah.
that were dumbed down to be for kids, or just a randomly weird take on it. I mean, what MCU has done, it's a kind of a gritty, real feel, and that's what the comics always usually had.
Yeah. And they just want to do something interesting with the character. It's just not a cash in to go, it's a kid's thing, just throw it out there, do whatever.
Yeah. Well, and as someone, I've been to a lot of Comic Cons across the country, and most of them have some form of social justice track.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of talk about, and it's a little bit more the indie comics that tend to have a wider array of characters from a diverse background.
Sure.
And yet there's a lot of them, especially in New York. There's several panels on people who were working with kids and comics and film, and sort of finding ways that they could speak to the youth that they were working with through a medium that was reflective of something that they could understand, versus the, maybe something more like traditional and that they were working in. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. So.
Yeah. No, and that's kind of the cool thing of comics too, is I don't want to totally write off that, kids shouldn't read comics and they're not for kids anymore or whatever. Because kids totally should, because there's a lot of those early lessons of, strong women. Especially comics these days have stuff like, trans people, gay people, different races.
I think they were always gay, right? Those tights. If you're wearing spandex, never mind. Okay, I'm just saying, like,
that's where the comics code came up with. In the 50s, there was a thing because they thought Batman and Robin were gay, and so they had to come up with a code to make sure that we couldn't write about certain things because they'll make kids gay if you read Batman and Robin.
It's true,
because that's what happens.
And there was a stigma about it. I mean, a lot of that stuff. People who didn't understand what was in the comics. I mean, to be honest, I feel like they were focusing on different things. There was a lot of other much darker kinds of themes going on, and whether or not Batman and Robin, were special friends.
Well, and that's the whole, you're gleaming into, you're pulling something out of that, and that's your take on it. So what's that say about you that you're pulling?
Interesting theory. We see what we know.
So maybe a couple senators had some interns that...
That's been a theme. For sure. So, I actually, on the last show, we do our Bicarian moment, and I talked about that this year is chock full of interesting movies coming out. And I mentioned a few that I was into, obviously the MCU stuff that's coming out. Shazam does look like it's actually going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
Of course, we've got Star Wars coming soon. What are you excited about?
The 3 MCU ones, Endgame, Captain Marvel, and Spider-Man, all look really awesome. I'm a big Hellboy fan, and so I think that looks pretty awesome to me. So we'll see where that goes.
I just hate reboots. It's so hard for me to get into that.
Well, the hardest
reboot mentality.
The hardest part of this Hellboy is just it's kind of cementing the fact we'll never see the end of the Guillermo del Toro trilogy of Hellboy movies, and you're like, that's just not going to happen now.
Yeah, exactly. Like by the time if they get to the reboot phase, then wherever the other story was at is where it is done.
Exactly.
And I enjoyed the Guillermo del Toro stuff. I thought it was really good.
Yeah. There's that. What else is this year? John Wick, I'm always a fan of. You got to love Keanu.
I feel like that franchise, let him reinvent himself. He was kind of languishing. And I've enjoyed him as an actor, but I mean, the first several movies after Bill and Ted, whoa, vampire dude. I love Dracula, and somehow he was still just a little bit of Ted. But I've really enjoyed John Wick, so you're right, that one's on my list for sure.
Yeah, that looks awesome. What else is this year? There's that weird Joker movie. I'm mostly just really curious about it. So it's a Joker origin story with Walking Phoenix playing the Joker, and it's directed by the guy that did The Hangover, and it takes place in the late 70s.
I loved The Hangover, and it was a terrible movie.
Yeah.
I mean, terrible. I should not have seen it.
And yet again, this is one of those things where I just hear about a DC thing that's being done, and it doesn't seem to tie into anything, and it's just sort of like, oh, why?
Yeah, so this one's completely separate than any of the current stuff going on. It's its own universe. It's its own set of everything.
And they just did that with Venom not long ago.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing as Venom. Yeah,
which I didn't see. I mean,
it's
again,
a movie.
I've heard it's maybe a little less than fine.
It's a movie, I think is the statement I just heard. You will see things on a screen.
It happened.
It happened. There's some movies, Hansel and Gretel. I went and saw that at like Cinnabar, and it was great because I just drank a pitcher of beer, essentially. I was just like, that's a movie that requires you not really have any brain cells going on. So, and I'm like, well, why did I pay to go watch? I think what I actually did was I went out to drink and they played a movie while I was doing that.
That's how I watched Justice League. I was like, I have to go to a Cinnabar or a draft house to see Justice League because I'm going to want pizza if I'm going to watch this. Like, I can't just have popcorn and actually pay attention.
Something to distract me a little bit.
Yeah. So it's
something to do other than just watch this movie.
So maybe Venom is that, like, it's a watch at home.
Yeah.
Or it's you're going to go out to do something else, maybe eat, drink, and then it'll be playing. It's not really the point of the excursion.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely.
You want to hang out with your friends, eat and drink, and there's a movie.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, and you know, along those lines, it's going to be an expensive year because there's a lot of movies that I really want to see in the theater. So
yeah, I think I have 15. I think somewhere on the list somewhere of movies I want to see.
And then you'll do YouTube video reviews of all of them. Is that the plan?
Generally, I'm kind of scaling back a little bit. Last year, I reviewed every single movie I saw, and I saw 24 different movies last year.
Woof.
And yeah. So I'm going to scale that back for my own sanity. So I'll be reviewing the best ones or the ones I have the most to say about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What made you decide to start a YouTube channel? Like wake up one day, I'm like, YouTube.
Well, I got into the early, before people realized kind of what it was stuff, where there's this website called That Guy with the Glasses, and it had a whole bunch of reviewers just doing videos. It wasn't actually on YouTube per se, but it was the same general idea. And I kind of liked what they were doing, and they also proved you can make a living with it. And although I'm not necessarily about making money, it seemed to be more legitimate, and it's just a creativity outlet. So I wanted to do something along those lines, and yeah, just thought I'd get out some ideas. The initial spark to finally do it was actually I saw the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, and nobody actually wanted to go see it, but everyone wanted to know what I thought because I was one of the like 5 people that braved the theaters to see it. And so I was like, I'll just do a video on this and talk about it, and just kind of went on from there.
Thanks. And you're a musician.
I am.
What do you do?
I'm a multi-instrumentalist. I started with drums way back when, and then moved to guitar, bass, and now I'm doing keys and vocals in a band.
Oh, what's the name of your band?
Leonardo.
Do you have stuff out there?
We do not yet.
Okay. So
Actually, that's kind of on me because as soon as he gets some stuff together.
Well, we actually just got a new bass player, so we got to get him up to speed before we're back in this studio again.
Well, now there's some pressure because now we're like putting it out there.
It's true.
And now all 14 of our listeners are going to be anticipating when they get to hear this. Okay, I'm sorry, 24.
Yeah, I'm excited. I like working on musical projects. I was actually in this same studio that we record this podcast, and was going through some old projects and stuff, and I was showing Isla some stuff that I had done, and it occurs to me I really like working on other people's music as much as my own, so
nice,
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, that was a spark from my friend who was just kind of bored, and we were in bands before, and he's like, hey, let's jam again, and we both kind of started doing it lightly just for fun, and then started hitting it heavy again. So, yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun.
Well, when you have something, let us know. We'll put it out there.
For sure.
Probably will listen to it. I don't know. I mean,
Probably. I'm going to listen to it a lot. I'm going to be mixing it. So.
I mean, yeah, if you want a metal version of Taylor Swift's We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together.
okay, now, actually, right now, I want that. You just sold me.
Well, so I don't know why we didn't think about this in the last year, but I'm thinking now, whenever we want to do a show on pop culture, current state of movies and stuff, we'll just have Matt back.
Yeah.
Literally one of my best friends and lives down the street from me, so this is very hard to do.
It's easier than texting. Last night we were watching a movie and they're like, text Matt your question. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, totally.
And I was in the middle of another movie.
As I said at the beginning, you are my phone a friend for any questions I have.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. One of my favorite stories I like is someone texts me, "What's SHIELD mean?" And I was like, "Well, in the movies, it means the Strategic Homeland Intervention Logistics Division, but in the comics, it means something different. Unless you're talking about when it first was introduced in the comics, then it meant this." Basically, they just want an acronym that spells SHIELD.
Basically, they want an acronym that spells SHIELD.
What can we make this mean?
Yeah. Well, that's what Phil Coulson says on the first episode of the TV show.
Yeah.
They really just wanted that. So, but I agree. We should definitely, anytime we do pop culturally things.
Yep, absolutely.
For sure.
And then we're going to go to one of Matt's.
Yeah, so look for us to be on one of Matt's YouTube
Thingies.
Yeah.
reviews. So
I think that'll be interesting. Still maybe a little scary, kind of fun. I can't decide.
Got to be on camera.
I know it's not my thing. Took me a year to get over my paralyzing terror of the microphone.
Podcasting is way easier
Yeah.
when you don't have to worry how your hair looks.
Right.
But it looks great. You guys look great.
Excellent.
Nobody's gonna. Well, I'm gonna do a selfie, so we will be able to. What do you call it? Test that.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being on.
Yeah.
We'll definitely have you back, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the movies coming out soon.
Sounds good.
Welcome to the Bicurian Moment.
So you go first.
Oh, I introduced it. That means you go first.
Oh, I see. Um, so one of the things I've noticed, we live in Denver and been out a couple of times in the last several weeks, and there's a large group of people that are out getting petition signatures to bring a bill up in relation to legalizing magic mushrooms, so psilocybin mushrooms and that sort of thing. Um, and it really got me thinking about kind of where the future of legalization in general is going. Um, Obviously, abusing drugs is bad, but so is abusing alcohol. And we've covered that, when we did our legal marijuana show. And in general, I'd still say the experiment's been a success. It hasn't been a negative thing. People being able to buy recreational marijuana in the state of Colorado and other states now. And I'm just kind of curious because there is a lot of things like the world around it is opening up. We were talking off the air a little bit about the studies being done, and Johns Hopkins is doing studies. There's been studies about psilocybin's tremendous benefits towards PTSD treatment and all sorts of things like that. There's also been studies on MDMA as a relationship counseling drug, and you brought up it reforms neural pathways, and so in a lot of ways it actually can be very therapeutic to people.
Yeah, there's folks who will, like therapists, who will take folks on a special kind of journey. If you're suffering from PTSD or you're having like a real challenge in your relationship, you can find folks who will like do this guided journey. It has some name that I can't recall right now. A friend of mine was talking about it,
Yeah.
and it's you've been married for 20 years, like I'm in a long-term relationship. You It's one of the things that they talk about around that is that you can get stuck, right? Like in your thinking rut.
Yeah.
And then they do that with you, and because it helps you form neural pathways, you can actually genuinely get yourself into a new form of thinking. It can be a tremendous benefit to a relationship or to someone who has PTSD, who can then walk through the trauma that they went through without feeling the automatic responses.
Yeah.
And then when they're not on the drug anymore, so it
That
goes,
stays. Yeah.
so they say, then whatever that new pathway is still exists, and they can walk that pathway instead of the trauma-filled, terrified one.
Yeah, and I think in general, there's so much just stigma around drugs. Drugs are bad. That you hear that still, and dare, and all of this sort of thing. And I'm feeling good. Like I don't know what we should legalize or not legalize. There's certain ramifications of some of those things, but in general, I do like that there's studies being done.
It's getting some actually legitimate information about how these things, a lot of these things, like especially like MDMA specifically, that used to be a drug that they used with mental health patients.
Yeah.
And then they stopped using it because the side effects of using it every day, the crash afterwards were so bad.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's an extreme reaction to the situation, instead of like working to figure out how to actually do it in a way that was good for the patient.
Which just takes studies. And so, yeah, I mean, just seeing, the idea that psilocybin mushrooms could potentially be on a ballot to get legalized. And, I kind of draw a parallel because people talk all the time about marijuana as a gateway drug. And apparently it's actually become that now
for legalization. Well, there's also a pendulum thing. Like there was this like super big push against the whole industry. And then, and a lot of that, if you look into it, there's a lot of racism in it.
Yeah.
And then now there's sort of some sanity, I guess, maybe being applied, and the reactivity around it is being looked at, which I think is good. I mean, I was a Dare Generation kid. Like I totally bought into all of that just say no Nancy Reagan thing. And I had a total like knee jerk reflex reaction against all of it. And then my sister got a DUI from her prescription drugs that she was legally prescribed, that she either abused or misused. And I just had this moment of like, oh, it's not the thing. It's how you handle it.
Yeah.
Like, are you being responsible? Are you are you smoking pot and driving? That's the same question as
It's a terrible idea, whether you drink and drive or smoke pot and drive,
right.
or, you know, I
You're putting
mean,
yourself and others at risk. Are you going to smoke pot before you do something, perform surgery or, any more than you drink before? And that was when I had like this moment of like, oh, this reflex that I have about drugs actually keeps me from thinking critically about, like, if a doctor gives it to me, do I think about it in the same way that I would think about something else? Do I actually analyze what I'm getting, how it affects me? And I've always been pretty conservative. Like, if I wouldn't, take a pain pill and then go drive my car or something.
yeah.
But it was just a moment for me to realize, like, we've demonized this one thing when actually the illegal drugs, the only difference between them is that for one reason or another, someone decided they were illegal, and some of those reasons were stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there was just a lot of laws that were passed about these things in the 60s that had more to do with not wanting the hippies to take over than any kind of like legitimate study. So anyway, something that's been on my mind.
And thank you. Actually, I didn't realize that I knew there was that one petition that we saw, but I didn't realize that it was
Yeah, there
getting
just seems to be a big push.
more legs.
Yeah, there's a new legalization effort. You can really start seeing it now.
Well, I'm just glad people are thinking more critically about it, because hopefully we'll also get them to think more critically about, I mean, the biggest epidemic we have, right, is opioids. Those are super legal. So,
Yeah.
that's the thing. My Bicurian moment, and I'll make it quick because we went a little over on time otherwise. I got a new car, a new to me, used car. It has a CD player, so I've been listening to all these other CDs of mine. For those of you who've never seen a CD, just look it up on Google. And I've been listening to this band that I used to love a lot. It was Chumbawamba. And they had one popular song, Tub Thumping. Everybody knows it. And then several albums of music that I loved. And part of what I loved about them was they were fun musicians. They did like each album kind of has its own sound. Like they were always playing with their sound. And their purpose was actually to get their political and social ideas out. Like the band was formed to use music as a vehicle because they believe that media was the best way to, especially like entertainment media, was the best way to sort of disseminate ideas throughout the population. And so I loved that about them, and I've just been listening to their songs and just thinking about how like they are incredibly entertaining, and yet when you listen, there's definitely a lot of thought that comes up for me around like what they inspire me to reflect on.
Well, for our listeners' benefits, what is their genre again?
Anarcho pop.
Yeah, they're very interesting. I like most of what I've heard, and you've been playing it more lately, so I've caught a bit here and there. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of bands like that I feel like, maybe they released one album that became popular, and then you can dig in and find out, oh man, they had like 10 more albums. They didn't necessarily rise to popularity, but they were a very talented band or whatever. So
yeah. So that's that Bicurian of the things can be very entertaining. And I felt like it went well with the show with having Matt on the show, that just because something is entertaining and even maybe a diversion doesn't mean that it doesn't have something worthwhile to connect to or reflect on. And not that everything entertaining has to. And also, I just feel like there's times when we can get super serious, maybe take ourselves seriously, and or dismiss things because we don't get it, like Bill Maher did.
yeah.
So I was just thinking about that. Like I enjoy them so much, and I feel, inspired by what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening. We are really hoping that you will join our mailing list. And that's at bit.ly/bicure, BICUR. And then you can get our episodes and our blogs conveniently emailed directly to you. Well, as long as you spell your email correctly. Learn more about us at bicurian.com/podcast. Don't spell it like that.
And if you like what we're doing, please rate us on your favorite listening platform of choice. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.